Today's episode of the Ramp It Up podcast contains explicit language and may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener's discretion is advised. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Ramp It Up podcast with your host, Ronell Sinuis.
Are you ready to ramp it up?
Ramp it up, ew!
Hey, yo, ramp it up, B.
Girl, ramp it up! Ramp it up!
The Ramp It Up podcast.
Hey, you need to ramp it up.
Ramp it up.
On today's episode of the Ramp It Up podcast, I have the pleasure and great honor to have a good friend of mine joining me on the podcast. I know I say special guest and important persons very often, but today I have to say the individual joining me is extremely important, and we've had the pleasure of getting to know each other rather well for 2 years now, just about.
Pretty close.
Wow, time flies. I'm getting old. But Erin Taylor, the voice you just heard, say hello to the people. How you doing today, Erin?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
You were one of the very first folks I've wanted to have on here ever since we met through the United Spinal and started talking about advocacy. And I blame you. I told you, I point my finger at you for setting me down this road of advocacy and teaching about disability etiquette and now accessibility and ableism. So if anyone ever gets tired of hearing me talk about all this, it's Erin's fault. Blame Erin. And plus, Erin is joining us from all the way on the other side of the U.S. I'm in sunny South Florida, and Erin is all the way in Oregon. The only thing I knew about Oregon prior to talking or meeting Erin, rather, was the old school video game on all the computers, the Oregon Trail. So that was about it. That's all I knew. You can get typhoid and diphtheria on the way through Oregon. That's all I knew. So yeah. And I'm learning a lot more. So thank you, Erin.
You're welcome.
As we all know, the month of March is Women's History Month, and I wanted to just highlight a couple women that I've come across. Shout out to Jean Minkle for joining us last episode. And today, Erin and these ladies are not only just great in what they do, but also in their influence in the disability community. And I just wanted to give them their roses while they're here and still very active in the community. So a little bit about Erin. I'm going to share her bio, rather long. She wrote it. It's like 4 pages. For more than 15 years, Erin Taylor has dedicated herself to advocating for health equity and promoting wellness by helping eliminate barriers and health disparities for disabled people throughout Oregon. She does this by interweaving equity, inclusion, and accessibility throughout her work and being intentional in her commitment to diversifying awareness of the vast range of disability experiences and identities, ensuring that disabled people's voices are heard, their intersectionality is acknowledged, and their needs are met imperative in Taylor's work. Even though Erin's roots are with people with intellectual disabilities, she does her current work through a cross-disability lens. Now, she holds a master's in disability studies from the City University in New York and a BA in communication studies focusing on community health education from Western Oregon University. She has built a strong foundation as a master trainer with expertise in creating accessible, universal, and inclusive materials for trainings, workshops, and curricula for Oregon Health and Science University's Oregon Office on Disability and Health and University's Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. That was a mouthful. During the pandemic, Taylor saw a need to bring education and awareness around disability because of the injustices she saw. She recognizes that the topic of disability is very complex, nuanced, and layered. So Erin and her partner started AIM for Access. Accessibility and inclusion matters. Creating a business allows Taylor and her partner to hold space for these conversations in ways that will leave people understanding the why you should care to make our world inclusive and accessible. This business also allows Taylor to bring her passion for health promotion back into her work. Erin identifies as having non-apparent disabilities and is deeply involved and integrated with her peers in the local cross-disability, LGBTQ, and social justice communities. In her free time, Erin is a musician who enjoys photography and the beauty of the PNW. She enjoys kayaking, camping, hiking, and spending time at the coast with her partner, 2 dogs, Millie and Lila. And I'm just going to add, and enjoys having great and funny conversations with her friend, Rodell.
As often as we can, of course.
Erin, that was a lot. That was a whole lot.
That was a lot. The end. Now we're done.
I'm going to take a quick water break and come back. But that was just what's on paper. And I have to say, I've had the honor of participating with you in a few of your trainings. I've been a student of a couple of your trainings, learning from you firsthand, and you allowing me to have a space to contribute as well, and some of them. And just from my experience alone these past 2 years, I've learned a lot of what you're doing in the community. But it's time to share with our people. It's time to share with my listeners. So aside from all what's on paper and degrees and all that fun stuff, tell me a little bit about who Erin is and I guess your educational background. But let's find out who Erin Taylor is.
That's very long. Do you have hours to explain? No, just joking. Yeah, I think before my educational endeavors that I've had, because I was a non-traditional student, which means I went back to college after the age of 40. I mean, that's one of the definitions of non-trad student. But my work really started in disability advocacy 30 years ago. So I started working after high school. I'm aged myself, but I'm proud to say I'm turning 50 this year. So I am embracing it and loving it.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a pretty, yeah, it is amazing. So I started working in a group home of 10 residents 30 years ago. So a group home is where people with, oftentimes this one particularly, most of the people that lived in the group home had come out of the institution that had closed in Oregon. And so they came and lived in this home. They didn't know each other. They were just put in this home. And we were, quote, to teach them. I use air quotes because that's, back then there's been a huge shift in what advocacy and disability justice, disability rights looks like in a residential training home. So the plan was for these individuals that lived in the group home to be able to learn skills to live on their own. So I started that, like I said, over 30 years ago. And so much has changed in 30 years. That was right when the ADA had come into play. But the interesting thing was when you worked in group homes is you didn't really hear a lot about the ADA. It wasn't a part of conversation. And so it wasn't until a little bit later that I really started learning about the ADA. So, dog barking. Anyway, so that's really where my work started in disability advocacy. Now, the interesting thing is as I started that, I didn't realize at the time, now that I have theory and understand more about disability, that really the work that I did was like out of like the charity model, like helping those people, right? Helping disabled people. I saw injustices. I didn't understand exactly what it was, but I knew that this was something I was very passionate about and I wanted to work in this field. Since then, a lot has changed as far as my perception of the work I do and really getting more into disability justice and the importance of shifting that mindset for me has been really important and a huge part of my journey.
Now, that is uncommon, especially for the 90s, early 90s, where, like you said, the ADA is just coming into play because I guess you could say disability rights movement was along lines with the civil rights movement. We're talking about mid to late 60s, and the perception of people with disabilities. There wasn't much, I guess, humanity when it came to dealing with people with disabilities. It was usually those, as you said, those people who are sick or who are less than, who just couldn't, quote unquote, participate or contribute to society. And outside of, I'm assuming, a nurse or a doctor or some sort of therapist, very few people ventured into working with people with disabilities. So how does a young woman out of high school end up working at a group home?
I had a neighbor actually who managed the group home that I went to work in, and she asked if I was interested in working at it. So I thought I'd give it a try. You know, I had worked in different like resource classes in high school, and different aspects of disability had always been through my life span, and the work that I did, the volunteer work. So it's always just a part of most of my life. But I never thought of it as like a job, or that I could, you know, I never thought of it as a job, and as like that I would still 30 years later be doing similar work.
Which is amazing in itself, because not many people stay that long in certain careers and moves. And again, from such a young age to where you're now, I'm sure you witnessed the evolution, of course, of how people with disabilities have been perceived. And of course, you spoke about some of the injustices. So seeing some of those happening to where we are now in a world where we're trying to become as inclusive as possible. Like, what would you say are some of those biggest changes in some of those behaviors, especially coming from group home settings?
Yeah, so there's so many topics, and a lot of my friends who have been in the field for a long time too, we talk about that because we've seen such fast changes with how we did things back 30 years ago versus how we would do it different today, right? And we at the time we only knew what we knew, and we did the best we could. But now looking back, it's like, oh, we could have done so much different. So an example of that for me has been when it really was embraced person first identity. So person with a disability, person who uses a wheelchair. And that was really embraced because people had been institutionalized. And so they're like, no, we want to be, people with disabilities said, we want to be known as a person first. And so that came about. A lot of the work we did really had to do with independence. Independence being the ultimate goal, whether that was independent for living on your own or going to the store, whether it was, getting dressed, so normal daily activities. The main focus was how can people become more independent, which was an important part, and it still is a very important part. In the process, we did not talk about interdependence and the beauty of interdependence. So now I see where there's people who are acquiring additional disabilities or aging into disabilities, and their independence is shifting because they need and want support, but it's hard for them to understand that, like, you're not losing your independence. We are all interdependent on each other, and we all help each other out. And so I think concepts like that has been really important for me to be able to look back and reflect on and be like, oh, we didn't do it wrong, because independence is still such an important fact. But how can we integrate the two together and really talk about the importance of independence and interdependence? Oftentimes when we talk about independence, it has to do with like strength and success and productivity, right? We are successful once we become independent. We're also successful being interdependent. And so concepts like that have changed. We've also seen I've seen a shift of person first to identity first. So wheelchair user instead of a person who uses a wheelchair user, instead of a person with a disability, a disabled person. Also, I've seen my own personal shift, my personal experience shift from having no disabilities to acquiring non-apparent disabilities. So even through the years, my identity has shifted through the process as well. And that's been interesting for me to self-reflect on and find out like my identity through this process. And grad school really helped me with that.
And it's interesting that you say that, because I've seen that shift in myself as well, because I mean, growing up in the 90s and hearing some of the terminology that was just regularly used and accepted at that time to what is deemed not polite conversation or even ableist conversation or terms, and my understanding of what disabilities were. We were kind of brought up to understand that if you acquired a disability, that was essentially the end of your life, or someone born with a disability would never lead a quote unquote normal life. And now, like you said, 30 years later, aged myself just a bit as well, understanding that that is a very, not only ableist, but it's just an ignorant way of thinking about it. And not ignorant in the sense of someone being malicious, but just not knowing that you can live, like you said, either independent or interdependent, or just a full life to whatever the extent the individual chooses. Just because myself, having acquired my injury when I turned 30, the average person was like, dang, well, that's the end of your life, not realizing I've been on adventures. I've done some crazy things or some wild activities, or, I've just been blessed ever since. And yes, one chapter may end, but that doesn't mean the end of your life. So our identities change as well, as you said, just learning more about the community. And, it's really shifted my opinions and my outlook as well. So now as we continue, so you had your experience working in the group home, and, it's easy, of course, hindsight is always 2020, but let's move on to your career as it continues. You're now college age, you're about in your 20s. Where are you moving as far as your career?
I actually took a big break from working on disability and, just working period. I was a stay-at-home mom for several years. And then once I became single, I really thought, what brings me joy? And it was being able to go back into working in the field of disabilities. To me, it was just really the one thing that had always been in the back of my mind. Like, when I go back, this is what. So I went back to the same organization I had worked for years before, and started working in a group home again, and worked up to be a co-manager there. And at that time, that's when I think my philosophy really started changing on what advocacy is, what a disability is, looking at disability through like a social model lens, not a medical model lens. So realizing like the injustices that society really imposed on disabled folks. So that's when I decided to go back to school. So I was raised, that women don't really go to college. I was raised in a really religious family. So for me, going back at the age of 40 was a huge step in many ways. So I went and was able to get a really great scholarship that allowed me to go get my 4-year degree in communication studies at a local small university here in Oregon, close to my home, and then just continue working. And at that time, that's when I started working up in Portland at OHSU, which is a big teaching hospital, Oregon Health and Science University, and really changing so much of my work, and realized that I didn't want to work in group homes any longer, that I really fell in love with health promotion and how that could impact a person's quality of life. So that's, my life really just took a huge change at that point of my work. And I realized like I really wanted to work in the public health realm, health promotion. But that's when things started shifting for me, really, as far as like where I am today. I think in my not only work and personal life, but my passion and like my lifelong goals. So then I moved up to Portland about 4 years ago, and the pandemic happened.
Okay, wait. We're not going to jump into the pandemic yet, because I wanted to kind of leave that for a second. Now, you use two terms, and I've had the opportunity to learn them recently, especially with my studies with digital accessibility, and of course, you introduced them to me. But you use the term medical model and the social model, and a lot of the terminology are becoming more public or more popular now, especially in like the advocacy communities. But can you just give me a brief description of both words, or both terms rather?
Yeah, so the medical model of disability really looks at that the disabled person is broken. They need to be fixed. You go to a doctor to get healed, to get fixed because you're broken. The social model really says, no, it's society that's broken and needs to be fixed. There's nothing wrong with a person who has a disability, we're perfectly fine. It's society that needs to switch. So whether that's policies, whether it's attitude, whether it's physical accessibility, those are all important aspects of the social model and of disability, and really being able to talk about, coming from working at a medical hospital, so much of it was through the medical model lens. So that's really when I started looking like, how can I do my work, not seeing that people need to be fixed, and how do I meet people where they're at, realizing that it's really society that needs to be fixed. So, my shift of the medical model, social model really started to take place when I worked at the hospital.
Now, what I really like about learning about the different models is they tell you that none of them are 100% the right model, and neither are 100% wrong, because yes, there are some individuals who are looking to be, to have a cure or to be quote unquote fixed. And there have to be professionals that look at it from that perspective. But at the same time, that is not 100% the best way to look at it. While the social model is, is definitely lots of room for society to make changes. And, we've talked about accessibility, whether in brick and mortar or rather digitally. So I truly do enjoy learning that aspect of it. And, I love debating and looking at things from different perspectives. So I see the space for both. But why is it important for, I guess, the average person, as we often discuss, to be able to understand the difference between both and to, I guess, treat people with disabilities accordingly?
Yeah, so I want to make this personal for a moment and talk about the importance, like why there is the importance for medical model too. And this is my personal feeling. So some people do not, but this is necessarily agree, but this is my personal. So it took me a long time to get diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis. And when I finally did, which took doctors to be able to do that, right? And lots of years and visits and figuring out what's going on with my body, it gave me a sense of like, oh my goodness, okay, this is real. This is something that is going on with my body. I have not created this myself, like in my head. And it helped me find community. So it helped me find people that had similar, not my exact experience, but maybe the same diagnosis or similar, like rheumatoid arthritis or osteoarthritis, and able to talk about it with somebody else who may like understand what it's like to have your body not have any spots, and then to get strep throat and be covered 90% of your body with psoriasis, right? So it gave me, so the medical model was really important for me to get that diagnosis, not only so I could get treatment, but so I could find community as well. So in that way, me personally, that's where the importance really was. When we come and look at the social model, it's important to so much of the work we do with access and inclusion, because the ADA, when it was written, that's just the bare minimum, right? That gives the basic laws of what needs to be done, mostly with physical structures, but there's so much about the attitude. And you mentioned like my journey on ableism together and like piecing it apart, and really because it's so complex, and being able to say, I remember one time you said, I've been experiencing ableism, but I didn't know there was a name to it, right? And once there was, it was like, there's this moment with you, and that's what I absolutely love to see. It's like, oh my gosh, when people realize like, there is a name to this, and this is ableism. These are the injustices that I face. These are the way people treat me, the attitudes. So that's where I think the social model is really important, is be able to look at, like you said, the brick and mortar, the digital, but also the attitudinal barriers that society has on disabled folks and other marginalized communities too.
And again, we've had some great conversations, and one in particular is acknowledging we're from different places in the country. We're from different backgrounds, and that really plays a big part in our perceptions of advocacy and ableism, because, you're from a way more liberal area than I, in some parts. And some folks assume because Miami and Broward, they're so diverse that reflects Florida. No. We like to joke around that South Florida is very different from all of Florida. I'm like, I'm from Miami, not Florida, because it's overall very conservative in its way of thinking. And when it comes to being PC or, shifting language to different areas to what's considered to be more inclusive to some, you and I have had conversations. And this is where I have to say, whether you accept it or not, I kind of put you in the mentor space for me because I'm learning so much from you, but you allow room for me to debate it, even as we work together, which we'll get into shortly. But the reality is coming from the everyday Joe Blow, Jane. Is there an opposite for Joe Blow, Jane? I don't think there's one. But Joe Blow, Jane Blow, just the average person that knows nothing about advocacy. They're like, well, why do I need to care about ableist language? Not saying things like wheelchair bound or bed bound. Why do I need to care about not using terms like retarded, which are very much so always kind of had a negative connotation? But then when you and I start talking about, language, and, there's some terms that even myself, I was like, that seems kind of silly. That might be, we're pushing the PC envelope a little too far. But why would you say at least being open to this conversation is necessary just for the everyday average person?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Give me a second to think. I think it's important because words matter, right? And a person's identity, we'll take the word crazy. You and I have discussed this word and how it's ableist, right? And you and I talked quite a bit about it. Like, you're like, well, why is this? And so we talked a lot about the history. So when you look a lot of the terms like lame, idiot, crazy, they link back to institutionalization and how people were dehumanized and the injustices that people face, disabled folks face. So it's really important to understand that as we've talked about in the 30 years I've seen so many changes, language is fluid and changes as well. So we know that even the words that we used back then, or even 5 years ago or 2 years ago, right? It shifts and it's fluid. And so it's important to always talk to each other and figure out what is the current best language, best practices to use. And it varies, like you said, from place to place. Culture, it changes. Location, even in the United States, it changes. And so we're not going to get right 100% of the time. And I'm not an expert. This is something I love to do, to talk to people about disability awareness and the negative impact words can have on a person. And so just kind of working through that and recognizing that myself, it's this is something that's really important to talk about, and we don't really talk much about it.
One of the things I enjoyed in our disability etiquette trainings that we've done together, or let me say that I've had the pleasure of joining you on, because it was all yours. I just gave my few words. But as I started understanding it, because if I remember correctly, before I even joined you, you and Brooke were kind of teaching me a bit about it on the side, and introducing me to some literature, and I wanted to understand something before I could dare try to teach anyone else about it. And we had these conversations when it came to using terminologies and words and why they matter. And then I started looking at myself as a wheelchair user, as a person with a disability. And I started thinking about some of the terms that were quote unquote hurtful, saying someone was handicapped or someone was disabled. Those are the words, they're special and they have special needs. But then, as I started to understand that, no, I'm a grown man and I have a disability, and there's nothing wrong with saying it. And it's about respecting the individual. I think one of the things that we really stood on was being compassionate to someone else. I'm personally not in the business of trying to change someone's vocabulary as much as I am trying to get them to be understanding and compassionate of someone else. And I think as we do that, that allows space for them to understand why referring, I've told you about some of my experiences in the hospital and people using certain terms towards me. And I'm like, well, I'll show you rather how that term could be a bit more offensive or have a negative connotation to it versus just telling you, hey, we don't say that word anymore. And I think coming from an area and a culture as well, that's not super sensitive. We're not that progressive either. I think taking that approach and helping people understand where those individuals are coming from tends to be a better prerequisite than, just pointing out terminology. And I think that has been one of the guiding lights I've taken from our conversations, because, again, someone may think using the term crazy means nothing, but I learned a few years ago, well, no, don't refer to people as crazy, because you don't know what they're going through. You don't know what mental or emotional issues may be causing them to act a certain way, and you're demeaning them and what they're going through with the terms. And it's not so much the word is bad, but how you're treating that person, I guess, is the best way to say, through how you speak to or of them. Hopefully that wasn't.
When you I want to clarify too, when you talk about language and you mention wheelchair bound too, if somebody comes to me and they say that they identify as wheelchair bound, I'm not about to tell them, no, you don't. You identify as a wheelchair user, right? So that's an important thing to differentiate when you talk about language, is we still have our own identities. Like, I identify as having non-apparent disabilities. Sometimes they are apparent, right? If I'm having a psoriasis flare or an arthritis flare. But a lot of people who have chronic conditions like me identify as having invisible disabilities. So that's okay. That's great. There's people that I do, have conversations with, and we both identify very differently. And that's also a really good time to say, see, we both have chronic conditions and yet we identify different, but that's our right to. And that's the beauty of like individuality, right? Is an identity, is we get to find what identity fits us. Now, I used to use invisible disability until I heard non-apparent. And then I'm like, I think I like that personally a little bit better. So I switched to that. And that's when I say language is fluid, that's the beauty of it, is it's how I want to identify myself. So I can change that. I also am a part of the LGBTQ community, right? And how I identify is different than how my partner identifies. And we have that right. We both love each other. We're both in a committed relationship, but we have that right to be able to identify differently. So I want to, make sure that I'm not about to go tell a person, sorry, your identity is wrong. You need to start referring to yourself as this, right? So you and I have also talked about that conversation too. And the importance of respecting how a person wants to be identified.
So now, as we, again, these are new concepts that we're kind of exploring and I think learning all at the same time, because at this point, no one is, like you said, a master at any of these. We're all becoming, I guess, authorities at the same time as they continue to evolve. But the pandemic hit and it disrupted the world as a whole. It literally took many of us from being in person on a regular basis to being terrified to be in other people's spaces. But ironically, it also connected us in many different ways. So you were going to talk about how your experiences then changed because of the pandemic.
Yeah. That's a very complex emotional topic for me, because it really changed I've also learned not to apologize for being emotional too. So the trajectory of where I am today was the pandemic. And now the funny thing is, when you look at the pandemic as far as work-wise for me, I facilitated self-management programs. So I facilitated chronic disease classes and living well, chronic pain, diabetes prevention classes. So I facilitated these, and they were all in person, right? So I would go places and I would visit with people and talk to people, like spend 6 weeks with them. I also was working on an advocacy and healthcare toolkit that we were piloting workshops in person. And then all of a sudden, I went to Hawaii to present at a conference and came back to Oregon, and the world shut down, right? And so I'm like, I lost my part-time job, which was catering. So it was a really strange time for me because it's like, what do? I'm working one job. The job that I have is most of it is in person, and all of a sudden now it's not. And I really had to, like, all of us had to pivot really quickly and figure out, like, how are we still going to do this? If anybody had talked to me about Zoom 3 years ago, I would have, like, ran out the door crying, being like, I cannot handle technology, right? And now 3/4 of my life is on virtual. So, and I've met amazing people like you and many other people through virtual world that I would have probably never met, because before our worlds were very small, at least mine was, and very centric to a set area, which is the Portland area in Oregon. And now, like, it's a really cool way to be able to advocate at a really wide range that we couldn't in the same way that we can now. So looking at that, my work had to shift really quick. But not having a part-time job and only having a full-time job, it gave me free time, extra time. And my partner's like, why don't you go back to college? You've always wanted to finish your master's degree, because I had started a couple years before. And so I did. I applied for the disability studies. I had been looking at this degree, and I knew that I really wanted to go into disability studies and really just immerse myself in the social model and learn about the importance of people sharing their lived experience, not me sharing other people's story, but the importance of people sharing their own experience, having their voices heard when it came to injustices. And really, so that's what I did, was I went back to school. So to finish my master's. So I lived in Oregon, went to college in New York, and then figured out how to take these classes that we were facilitating and how to put them online, which then again, I was able to meet people all over the place with having these classes in a virtual setting instead of in-person setting. So it was an interesting time for us to be able to, like, really, I would say, change so much of the work I did, but also my own fears too, of like technology, or it took a lot. It was a big learning curve, and you think, it's that ageism creeps in when you're like, oh, I think I'm too old for this, or and getting out of that ageist mindset that, no, I'm not. I can learn how to do all this stuff, and now I get to talk to other people and like how to, like, be able to mute and unmute yourself, how to be able to access on your phone versus your laptop, So it's been, if somebody told me 3.5 years ago where I would be today, I would have never thought that. But I think most people could say that when it comes to the pandemic. Also, too, the advocacy work is really, my advocacy work and journey has really changed because of seeing the injustices, seeing people's quality of life questioned, and just really had me realize, like, how much work there is to do and how much we need to have conversation about how disability often is not part of the conversation. Or if it is, we say it's at the end, it's like, and disability. Let's not forget, and disability, right? And yet, an afterthought. And yet, if you think about it, if we do not have a disability now, we will either acquire or age into a disability, right? So not only does it benefit us now, but it will benefit us in the future. So disability really is a minority that crosses, like, it crosses all barriers and cultures. It really can hit anybody at any time. And I think we saw that with a pandemic, with so many people becoming disabled and even dying too. So seeing those injustices just really pushed, with going to grad school for disability studies, just like I say, just kind of put a fire under my butt and got me realizing, like, this is not right. We need to all work together. So yeah, it was life-changing for me.
And needless to say, it was for me as well, because I'd done advocacy work before with the Alzheimer's Association prior to my injury, and I'm a very personable person. I'm very out there, a socialite. I just want to be in the middle of the group. So, I went from being all over the place, hosting events, doing stuff on the radio, and then, of course, I was injured, and then, first year is essentially just, hey, how how do you navigate therapy? And then, you know, we're being social, whether it's going to therapy, hanging out with some of my other friends from therapy. That was our way. And advocacy was nowhere close to like I'm gonna be honest, like when you're in that moment, you're just thinking about you. How can I get better? How can I save myself? Like, yeah, you'll think about your friend, like, hey, he or she needs a couple catheters, but you're thinking about yourself until you start to notice those little injustices. You start to notice things or places that are inaccessible. You start to realize that, oh, this wasn't made for someone with a wheelchair in mind, or when you're even worse, when you're on the phone trying to get services and the person on the phone is treating you like you're a drug addict or you're trying to scam the system. I started realizing that even when it came to therapy and in the home rule versus going out, and someone told me I'm homebound and I'm not allowed to go out. I'm like, oh, none of this makes sense. I just want to get back to work, go back to school, just do something. I just need these services. And then pandemic hit, of course, and out of boredom, sheer boredom, we found out about the United Spinal, and that's where I guess my curiosity was at least piqued, you know, about what they're doing and their work in the disability community. And of course, that's how you and I met as you got involved with United Spinal as well. And it just kind of goes to show that our worlds, like you said, became much broader. And it's not like the internet wasn't around forever and video calling was already here and chatting, but for some reason or another, it never really clicked on this stage. You know, I'm sure Jobs were doing some sort of international calls and stuff online, but the fact that everyone and literally their mother and grandmother are now using Zoom, it was a great way to connect. And I started learning from people like yourself and Michelle and Tom and just all of the people from the United Spinal, just on different levels about advocacy and how we can make a difference. And that there were other people around the country and essentially the world that were having similar experiences there. Like you said, your diagnosis may not be the exact same as my own. Someone might have spina bifida versus spinal cord injury or arthritis, or whatever reasons they're a wheelchair user, but we're starting to, like, I'm gonna keep stealing what you're saying, light the fire under our butts about advocacy as well. And you know, it just kind of, like you said, it brought us together at United Spinal. And so, you know, let's talk a bit about where you are now in the work you're doing for advocacy.
Yeah, so I think I want to go back a little bit when you talked about, you know, the beginning of the pandemic and how so many people were like, you know, really like in their homes and we talked about social distancing, but that didn't mean that was really like physical distancing, right? It didn't mean that we couldn't be social. So at the work that I was doing at the time, I had a lot of people would call me and be like, I don't understand what this social distancing means. Am I not allowed to visit with people? Am I not allowed to? So it really had me realize, one, how important the messaging was and how it was being misunderstood by so many people, the messaging about the pandemic. And I worked with, you know, a lot with writing plain language, finding easy ways to explain situations that are going on, or for me, it was health promotion at the time. But the loneliness and social isolation was huge for people. I mean, it still is, right? And all of a sudden, though, like you said, you're a social person. You love being out in the middle of people and groups. And then all of a sudden, things were shut down. And we didn't have those groups. So we didn't have the same way to socialize. So that's where it was, I would say, I got permission to use a curriculum called Walk with Ease. And if just the title itself, but also a lot of the requirements to be a part of this program, Walk with Ease, it's a 6-week program, was really ableist. So we were able to take this curriculum, put it online, and do online classes, which usually were not done, and really look at the ableist viewpoint. And instead of talking about walking with ease, we talked about movement and how movement was different for everyone. Right? So maybe somebody needs range of motion, and that is important for the person. Maybe somebody needs to walk a mile a day. You know, for us with arthritis, we say motion is a lotion for the joints. and that's what keeps us going, right? So being still, I know, I love that one, right? Isn't that great? But it's true though. That's what helps us be able to really keep us moving and easily moving. So my partner Laura and I created this online platform of Walk with Ease, and talked about movement. We made it with realizing that there's Zoom with closed captions now, and we made the PowerPoints. I learned how to make PowerPoints through universal design and accessible. So there was a lot we did to really try to make it as universal for people as possible. And the class was really successful. We had over 30 people. And I don't mean the success was the number of people, but we had that many people stay throughout the duration of the class, which is really oftentimes people drop off or not, continue attending. What we saw though was that social connection was so important. So we actually added at the end of the session, we ended a half hour like after hour party. And we would have kind of like the conversations you and I would have with Tech Talks, just a topic, and we would just hang out and have social time. So maybe if it was like 100 degrees outside, we talk about how do you still move when it's that hot and stay cool? For everybody that's different. And so they could give you'd have people drop different links in that would be like water bottles or Bluetooth fans or, different things like that people would use. And then we could share it out with everybody. And it was amazing to see. I had never experienced until that the social connection people could have online, because I had always thought it had to be done in person. So that was huge in the work that's got me to where I am today. Because then, like you said, when I started working at United Spinal, it was virtual. It was back in New York, right? I live in Oregon. So being able to see the importance of that social connection does not have to look one specific way. And it also doesn't work for everyone, right? Some people like being in their home and still visiting with people, or people may have a hard time. Transportation is a barrier, or pain is even a barrier of getting to places, sitting through a class and then coming back. So there has been this beauty of seeing how the online platform really works for so many people when we talk about health and wellness, and also just that social connection.
I'll agree on that point as well, because the inability to socialize in those first couple of weeks, especially with the mixed messages we were getting, it was like the world's coming into an end, and essentially what it was, you'll never see your loved ones again, only the people in your house, and you can't even trust them, they'll get you sick. So it was debilitating, to say the least. You went from hanging out with friends and family daily to don't leave your house, wipe everything that comes in from outside, and being able to connect. And first of all, as we all know, I have my spinal cord injury, so I don't have full mobility in my arms. So the way I used to use the computer years ago is not the same. And I know many of my friends were doing the same thing, and assistive technology wasn't really as important because we were going to the gym all the time and we were seeing each other in person. So now there was a scramble to get the right technology fits for everyone so we can participate. And I made connections with people that I otherwise would have never met. You guys, I can't wait to have the opportunity to hang out in person. I've had the chance to meet Vincenzo and Abby in person because of the trips I've had the pleasure of taking. But I can't wait to meet you and Laura, and I can't wait to meet Michelle and Brooke and Ian and some of the other folks we met. But I joke about it a lot because our parents tell us don't talk to strangers and don't meet people on the internet. But that's all we're doing right now. That's literally all we got to do. But it ended up being the silver lining to a very big cloud, and with it, we were able to connect and learn a lot because, again, I don't think I would have been as easily exposed to etiquette and accessibility talk when it came to disabilities. I think, to a small degree, especially now in the current climate we are in, everyone's talking about inclusion and things of that nature. But we're talking about 2020, 2021. It was just kind of coming around. So, again, you were my director at United Spinal. We had the pleasure of working together. Because of Erin, I got to go to virtual space So if I haven't said thank you a million times, I'll say it a million and one times. Thank you for even thinking about putting my name in the hat when it came to that activity and many of the other fun projects we've worked on together, and just building the community of not just people socialize, but people getting to use their expertise to make a big difference in when it comes to accessibility and disability justice. And in the bio, we talked a bit about Aim for Access, and I want to hear about this project that you're working on currently.
Yeah, so really taking the what we learned from the pandemic, that is still not over. I think that's hard for people to consider. And as we go back to quote, what is normal? I've been a huge advocate of saying that normal didn't work. So why are we so quick to go back to that? Is it because we're comfortable with it? Is it because we're just tired of what it's been? But as we move forward with that, it's really important to make sure that, especially policies, and that we don't go completely back to quote normal, right? Air quotes normal, because take these classes that I'm able to facilitate online. If we go back to them all in person, that means that there's a whole amount of people, the inequities will not be able to attend classes. And there's been a lot of talk of a lot of these classes going back to only in person, and a lot of facilitation and self-management classes of only going back in person and not being covered online, like through Medicaid and different, insurances. And this is really important to keep talking and fighting about, because for so many people, online does work. And we have seen where it does and how important it is for a person's quality of life. So I think with seeing things like people forgetting of the lessons that we've learned during the pandemic, the injustices that we've seen, the quality of life of people in marginalized communities question, it was really important to kind of say, how can we keep that from happening? And really what it came down to was creating Aim for Access. And so we realized that accessibility and inclusion matters, but it's not accessibility as far as just as a moneymaker or that it's a policy, but the why behind it. Why have things be accessible? Why have things be inclusive? And it's so that we can all, it benefits all of us, and disabled folks and non-disabled folks. So it's really important for us to, with Aim for Access, is just to be able to talk about that. How can we make sure that accessibility and inclusion matters for people? And what does that look like? Does it mean that I can go to a company and talk about disability awareness like you and I have done, right? Talk about ableism. Like, what is ableism? How can you recognize it? And then how do you become anti-ableist? Why is it important, as we talk so much about the DEI space, diversity, equity, inclusion? Why is it so important to talk about, ableism along with racism? You can't pick one social justice movement and be like, yes, I'm going to be, in support of this. You got to work with all of them. They're all interconnected, and you can't just you have to work on really recognizing the interconnectedness and recognizing the beauty of them for all people. And so maybe that with Aim for Access, that we work with a company, or maybe that I have a couple really cool contracts of, I know people who have grants that they've been awarded, and being able to help manage it, help co-manage it. So my work is really vast in what I get to do, but then also going back to health promotions. So Laura is a recreational therapist. I know you had her on one of your sessions, so she's able to do that privately. Well, I can do self-management classes. So it's what I think is really cool about Aim for Access is it really is holistic and it's integrated. It's not like I only want to work with companies and organizations, or I'm going to work with disabled folks, because guess what? Disabled folks work in those companies and organizations, and we often forget that. So the cool thing is we got to really work at it from a holistic viewpoint and all the way around. We also don't have an age limit or a disability type, and often for grants and funding, that matters, or the kind of work we do, right? Most of my work has been with the community of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Then when I worked at United Spinal, it was wheelchair users, right? And that both of those jobs for me has been a lot of self-reflection, because I do not identify at this point in my life as either of those communities, but I'm a fierce advocate and I want to be. So where's my place in the advocacy realm when I am not a member of the community? And you and I have talked a lot about that, like allyship, but yet an ally, what does that mean? Do you just say I'm an ally, or do you actually put it into action and do something to help, whether it's the injustices, whether it's advocacy? So that's what I'm excited about with Aim for Access, is we don't have the limits on ages or disability types or really what to do. So that's pretty cool and exciting for me.
And we talked a bit, and if you don't mind me putting a small amount of your personal business out there, but we talked a bit about the courage it takes to do your own thing and to make your own dream, because you had a vision, and we talked about it, and as you were transitioning from United Spinal to going full time on Infract, we talked about it. I was like, this, first of all, you are uber qualified to share not only the knowledge, your experiences, and to train others, but the passion that you have for the work that you're doing and for the individuals. I've seen it. I've seen you speak with people and how you treat each individual. And I've seen other people work with people with disabilities, and they tend to either work kind of hands off or with like the white glove, just like you're super fragile. Like I'll be careful. Whereas you're Erin, it's like, yo, we're talking. Like, this is just my buddy Ronell, or this is just Blake. They're just individuals. Like, yes, they might have a disability, but there's no reason to treat them quote unquote accordingly. Like, you can respect their needs and you can make sure things are accessible for them. But I've seen you embrace people and their accessibility needs without issue. And that's why I was like, I know for a fact that whatever you and Laura are putting together would be not just successful, but it'll make a difference. And we talked about it before, I'm always at your disposal, and I'm learning so much from both of you, and I'm putting it to use in my life personally, and just teaching friends and family and people I come across about ableism, and just some of the terms and the way the etiquette and just different aspects of it. And like you said, you have to kind of champion for all the fights because of fancy terms like intersectionality and other things like that everyone's learning about. And I just want to ask you, as we're kind of coming to a close, but like, what would you say, because there's always pushback, the news media and other outlets and people who are kind of anti-inclusion or representation or just change, like how do you address someone that is just not ready to make some of these transitions?
Yeah, that is like a whole complex conversation in itself, right? And I think oftentimes of like when you and I would first start working on doing disability awareness conversations, trainings, whatever you call them, you would ask like, what does this term mean? Or what's the importance of it? Or why are we talking about this? And I think that, and then I remember one day we were talking and you mentioned about, it kind of got me thinking that when we talk about meeting people where they're at, that also means where people are at and they're learning about whatever it might be in their life. In this case, it has to do with disability and disability awareness. And so it's really important for me to like have the conversations to where people don't feel like, oh, you're getting it wrong. you're screwing up on this, right? And a conversation like, well, have you thought of it this way? Or this is why we talk about like the importance of ableism, right? The importance of ableism in the workplace or in social life or in your home life or in healthcare, right? Wherever it may be. And I think it's just, it's really important to understand that like we're in this learning together. Like we mentioned, I'm not the expert. There's so much that I have to learn. I learn from you. I learn from other people every single day. And I think that's what Laura and I both really try to hope that we can help create, is just a space where we can all learn from each other. Don't think I'm answering your question really. I think I'm just talking at this point. I know it makes sense, but you can go the statistic route that 1 out of 4 people have a disability. That's a lot of people, right? And that if we will age or acquire a disability at some point in our life. So it affects us. If it doesn't affect us now, it will affect us one day. And why not? Why not talk about disability? Why not talk about the person with a disability? Why not talk about the importance of disability pride or disability identity, disability culture, and the beauty of it, and how we can all come together? Most of my friends I've created, especially during the pandemic, have had to do with whether it's in school or whether the work I do, about this topic on like the importance of just talking about disability. It's not a bad word to say. It's not a bad thing to be disabled, right? We're not broken. We don't need to be fixed. We're who we are. And I just think that's why it's so important to talk about it, is because it's a part of who makes us us.
And I will continue learning from you because, like I said, I'm still take a baby in this journey as I'm learning more about advocacy and where I fit in this disabled in or justice seeking world, or I said that all backward, where I fit in this world seeking justice for those with disabilities. There we go. That makes way more sense than how I said it the first time. But how can folks who are looking to get you to consult for them or learn from you, or have you and Laura and Aim for Access do work for them, contact you and social medias, whatever it may be?
Yeah, you can certainly email us. We don't have the website up yet. We're working on it, so we're hoping to have it up soon. Websites are a lot to
yes,
though.
yes.
And I have a friend who's helping me, and I'm so appreciative, because then again, I would have no idea as to what I am
And it
doing.
needs to be fully accessible to those with different disabilities.
And with our title of Aim for Access, if it's not, then we're doing it wrong, right? So it's really important. So I'd rather like take longer and get it right. So yes, you can email us at Taylor Riddler at aim-4-access.com. And I'm more than happy. Like, I love to just have conversations, right? It doesn't even have to come up to be work, but when it comes to different topics, as you and I know, we can go on and on and on for hours. So I just always want to keep it in the conversation. It's so important to always, especially as we see the pandemic supposedly wrapping up, whatever that looks like, it's important to keep this in the conversation and to keep it going. I know Judy Human just, she recently passed away a couple weeks ago, and she was an integral part in disability rights and the fight for, all disability rights and the 504 and helping with ADA, all of that. And it's so important for us to, her nephew said at her service that she took her pain and turned it into passion, and she took her anger and turned it into action. And I love that. I'm like, what a great way to be able to go through advocacy and really help fight for rights and justice.
It says a lot as well, because many of us have that pain daily and we get angry at a lot, and we have the option or the choice of doing something productive, changing the world, or just festering in it, because just being angry won't really get you anywhere. So I have to again say thank you for all you continue to do. We've had some amazing conversations. You've been very again compassionate and just explain the different things that come up, especially in our trainings. There's a lot of areas where people may disagree, and again, I think there's nothing wrong with disagreeing, as we continue to have some polarizing conversations out there for everyone listening. I think there's nothing wrong with disagreeing, as long as we can respect each other, show each other compassion. I'm quite sure we'll find some meaningful middle ground. And I'm as for your work with Laura and Aim for Access, it's going to continue to make differences in lives. And again, I thank you for this. I look forward to us continuing to do a lot of work together. Erin has suggested many guests for the podcast. So I often talk about Erin as a good friend of mine, a mentor. And again, I have to say thank you for being not only just an amazing person, but for continuing to champion for people with disabilities.
Well, thank you for having me. And of course, I always look forward to our chats, whether they're recorded on a podcast or not.
All right. Thanks so much, Erin. It was a pleasure. Thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the show. Connect with the podcast on social media. Check out our Instagram page at ramp.it.up.podcast or email us at rampituppodcast@gmail.com. Until next time.